This story begins on a Thursday evening, the kind of evening where the sky hangs low and heavy, and the world feels like it's exhaling in disappointment. And somewhere in that fading light sits Ethan Collins, staring at a glowing phone screen that is slowly eating away the last bit of confidence he has left. Red numbers, down arrows, losses piling up like accusations. He refreshes the screen again, and again, and again. But nothing changes. The money is gone. You've probably met someone like Ethan before, the guy who always hears about the next big thing just a little too late. The friend who jumps into investments because everyone else seems to be doing it. The person who believes that wealth belongs to those who can run the fastest toward whatever is trending. Tonight, Ethan is realizing how wrong that belief can be. He had put nearly all his savings, 14 months of disciplined, frustrating, lonely saving, into a hot new investment trend hyped across social media. Influencers were screaming about it. Reddit threads were bursting with triumph stories. His co-workers whispered about overnight success. And Ethan, afraid of being the only one left behind, followed. He always followed. But now, sitting alone on a cracked wooden chair in a quiet cafe, he feels the weight of a painful truth settling into his chest. Rich people weren't following the trend. Rich people were selling to people like him. A cup of cold coffee sits in front of him, untouched. His hands tremble. His throat is tight. He isn't just grieving the money. He's grieving the feeling that he might never understand how wealth really works. That maybe he's just not one of those people. And that's when a voice interrupts his spiral. "Rough day?" Ethan looks up. Across the table, seated a few inches too close, the way only older people who don't care about personal space can manage, is a man in his late 60s. Soft grey beard, calm eyes, a suit jacket that's clearly expensive, but worn casually, almost carelessly. Ethan forces a small laugh. "You could say that." The man smiles gently. "Let me guess. You followed a trend." Ethan freezes. The man taps the table with 2 fingers. The look on your face, I've seen it 100 times. There's something in his tone, not judgment, not superiority, recognition, experience. "Who are you?" Ethan asks quietly. "Name's Samuel," the man says. "I invest for a living." Ethan feels a small spark of hope flicker. "You mean like trading trends?" Samuel chuckles. "Quite the opposite, actually." He gestures toward Ethan's phone. "May I?" Ethan hesitates but slides the phone over. Samuel studies the charts with the practiced calm of someone looking at a weather forecast. "I lost a lot," Ethan mutters. "No," Samuel corrects gently. "You paid tuition." Ethan blinks. "Tuition?" "For a lesson every investor learns eventually." Samuel leans back, folding his hands. "Rich people don't follow trends, Ethan. They create trends." The sentence hits Ethan like a foreign language he somehow understands perfectly. Samuel continues, voice steady, patient. When something becomes a trend, it's already too late. By the time the masses discover it, the people who understood the value early, they're the ones cashing out. Ethan swallows, the reality stinging deeper. "So you're saying I never had a chance?" "I'm saying," Samuel replies softly, "you were playing a game without knowing the rules." The cafe hums quietly around them, low conversations, clinking cups, the steady buzz of the espresso machine. But for Ethan, everything else begins to fade. His focus narrows to Samuel's voice, to the strange sense that this encounter isn't random at all. Almost as if he was meant to hear this now, at this exact moment of his life, when he's cracked enough to let new ideas seep through. "What do rich people see that the rest of us don't?" Ethan asks. Samuel's eyes soften even more, like someone looking at a younger version of himself. "Patterns," he says simply. "Not trends. Patterns." Ethan frowns. "What's the difference?" "Trends are what everyone talks about," Samuel replies. "Patterns are what create the trends." He lets that sentence sit in the space between them. letting Ethan wrestle with it in silence. Ethan leans forward. But how do you learn to see those patterns? Samuel taps his chest. You start by recognizing what drives people. Fear, greed, hope, impatience. Understand people, and you understand markets. Understand markets, and you stop chasing what's popular. Ethan looks back at his phone, still glowing with red numbers, and something shifts inside him. Not clarity, not confidence, but curiosity. A curiosity he hasn't felt before. A curiosity that says, maybe I can learn this. Maybe I can change. Samuel stands up, placing a business card on the table. Come back here tomorrow at the same time, he says. If you want to understand why you keep losing and how people like me keep winning, I'll show you. And then he leaves. Ethan stares at the card. It feels heavy, more like a key than a piece of paper. Outside, the sky finally releases its rain, but inside, for the first time in a long time, Ethan feels something like possibility breaking through. He doesn't know it yet, but this is the moment that will change everything. The moment he stops being a follower and begins the journey toward becoming someone who creates trends. The next afternoon, Ethan arrives at the cafe earlier than he planned. He sits at the same wooden table, his fingers tracing the grain of the surface, trying to calm the nervous thumping in his chest. He half expects Samuel not to show up. Maybe yesterday was just a coincidence. Maybe the old man didn't really have anything to teach him. But at exactly the same moment, the minute hand touches the hour, Samuel steps through the door, not rushed, not slow, simply moving like someone who has long mastered the art of time. Good, Samuel nods as he reaches the table. You came back. I said I would, Ethan replies. Most people say they want to learn, Samuel says, taking a seat, but they only want the outcome, not the understanding. Ethan feels called out, though Samuel's tone isn't sharp, it's just true. It lands with a quiet weight. Samuel folds his hands on the table. Tell me everything. What exactly happened? Ethan takes a deep breath and begins. He tells Samuel about how the investment trend started showing up everywhere on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. How influencers promised life-changing returns. How co-workers whispered about it in the break room with wide, excited eyes. How he saw screenshots of people claiming they doubled their money in a week. I didn't want to miss out, Ethan admits, voice tight. Everyone around me was doing it. I felt stupid not being part of it. Samuel nods slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. So you bought? Yeah. And then it kept rising and rising. I felt brilliant, like I'd finally figured it out. He laughs bitterly. Then it dropped, fast, and I froze. I didn't know whether to sell, wait, or buy more. Everyone online kept saying it would recover, but it didn't. And then? Samuel asks gently. I panicked and sold everything. Ethan lowers his eyes. That's when the real crash happened, when I realized how badly I messed up. Samuel takes a long sip of his coffee before speaking. Do you know what you just described? A failure, Ethan mutters. A pattern, Samuel corrects. A deeply human pattern. He leans forward slightly, his voice dropping lower. The majority of people follow trends because the majority of people follow emotions. They see others winning, so they want to win too. They see others afraid, so they become afraid too. Humans are wired for survival, not strategy. Ethan shifts uncomfortably. So, I'm just wired wrong? No, Samuel says firmly. You're wired normally. That's the problem. Ethan blinks, unsure whether to laugh or feel insulted, but Samuel lifts a hand to clarify. Look, Ethan, most people lose money not because they're stupid, but because they're human. Their instincts, the same instincts that kept our ancestors alive, betray them in modern markets. He taps the table lightly. Fear of missing out, tap. Fear of losing, tap. Desire to belong, tap. These emotions fuel the herd, and the herd always moves late. Ethan lets the words sink in. So, the rich people don't feel those things? Samuel smiles. Oh, they feel everything. But they learned not to act on those feelings. They learned to question them. They learned to look deeper. He sits back, eyes drifting toward the window where people rush past on the rainy sidewalk. When you feel FOMO, Ethan, that's the market telling you you're already late. When you feel panic, that's the market asking, are you sure you understand what you're holding? When you feel comfort because the crowd agrees with you, that's the moment you should be the most cautious. Ethan exhales slowly. I never thought of it that way. Of course you didn't, Samuel replies, because you weren't taught to think that way. Most people learn about money through noise, not through reflection. He pauses, then adds quietly, you know, I wasn't always this calm about investing. Ethan lifts his eyes, surprised. You? Samuel chuckles. Oh yes, I was you, a younger, more impatient, more emotional version. I once chased a trend so aggressively, I ended up losing half of everything I owned. What did you do? I survived, Samuel says simply. And then I learned. Losses can destroy you, or they can educate you. It depends on whether you try to hide from them or learn from them. Ethan listens. The cafe sounds fading again, as Samuel's words form a kind of slow-burning clarity in his mind. So what's the first lesson? Ethan asks. Samuel places both palms on the table, steady and deliberate. The first lesson is this: if you follow the herd, you will always arrive last, because the herd moves on emotion, not insight. He lets the silence carry the weight of the message before continuing. Investing isn't about speed, Ethan. It's about understanding. And understanding begins with stepping outside the emotional current everyone else is drowning in. Ethan looks down at his empty coffee cup. I've been living in that current my whole life. That's why you keep losing, Samuel says gently. Not because you're unlucky, not because you're incapable, but because you're reacting instead of thinking. A slow, unexpected calm begins to settle over Ethan, the calm that comes not from certainty, but from finally hearing the truth he always suspected deep down. Samuel stands, putting on his jacket. Tomorrow, he says, I'll show you an example, a real investment story, one that will make everything I said today make sense. Ethan nods, gratitude and anticipation mixing inside him. And as Samuel walks away, Ethan feels something he hasn't felt in months. Not hope, not excitement, something quieter, something sturdier, alignment. He can finally see that the problem wasn't the trend. It was the way he thought about it. And now, for the first time, he is ready to learn how the people who create trends see the world. The next day, the sky's brighter, but Ethan feels anything but light. He walks to the cafe with a strange mix of anticipation and doubt swirling inside him. He wants to believe Samuel has answers, but part of him still fears this will all end the same way every financial lesson has for him: confusing, overwhelming, and painfully abstract. But when he arrives, Samuel isn't alone. He's standing outside, leaning against a black sedan, sunlight catching the silver in his beard. Today, Samuel says as Ethan approaches, we leave the cafe. Understanding doesn't always come from sitting still. Where are we going? Ethan asks. To visit the past, Samuel replies. Mine and, if you pay attention, maybe your future. The car ride is quiet. The city thins out into clusters of industrial buildings, warehouses, and small manufacturing plants. It's not glamorous, not modern, not anything like the flashy tech startups Ethan imagined investors would care about. Samuel finally turns into a narrow street lined with old brick structures. The car stops in front of a faded building with a peeling sign, Harrington Packaging Solutions. Ethan blinks in confusion. A packaging company? Really? Samuel smiles. Yes, really. This little boring business taught me more about creating trends than any hot tech startup ever could. They step out of the car and Samuel begins walking toward the front door. Years ago, Samuel begins, no one cared about sustainable packaging. Not really. Companies talked about it, but it wasn't trendy. It wasn't profitable. It wasn't exciting. He emphasizes the last word with a small smirk. Everyone was chasing tech. Everyone. Young investors, old investors, hedge funds, media, analysts. They were all hypnotized by whatever Silicon Valley was shouting about that week. Ethan nods slowly. He knows the type. AI today, crypto yesterday, biotech before that. But I kept noticing something strange. Samuel continues. Consumer behavior was shifting. Quietly. Subtly. Parents were looking for safer materials. Small businesses were asking for alternatives to plastics. Even restaurants were pushing for eco-friendly packaging because customers were asking questions. He stops walking and looks at Ethan. No articles, no influencers, no headlines, just patterns. Ethan exhales. The patterns you talked about yesterday. Exactly, Samuel says. While everyone else was staring at what was loud, I was listening to what was quiet. They enter the building. Inside is a modest production floor machines, humming, workers in safety goggles, boxes stacked neatly in rows. Nothing about it screams trend. Nothing about it looks like a billion-dollar idea. What does this have to do with creating trends? Ethan asks. Samuel gestures around them. When I first visited this place 15 years ago, it looked even worse. Older machines, fewer employees. The owners were tired, underfunded, and nearly ready to shut down. Ethan tries to picture it, the exhaustion, the stress, the scent of failure clinging to every corner. No investor wanted to touch this company, Samuel says. Why would they? It wasn't sexy. It wasn't new. It wasn't cool. The herd didn't even know it existed. They walk deeper into the facility until they reach a small viewing window overlooking a newer production line. Sleek machines turning plant-based materials into biodegradable containers. That's new, Ethan says. Samuel nods proudly. I helped them build that. I invested when everyone else laughed at me. They said I was wasting money. They said sustainability was a niche fad. They said no one would pay more for eco-friendly packaging. He turns to Ethan, eyes steady. People aren't good at predicting what will matter tomorrow. They're just good at repeating what matters today. Ethan feels something shift, a realization beginning to expand. So while everyone chased tech, Ethan says slowly, you invested in something people didn't care about yet but would eventually need? Now you're starting to think, Samuel replies. They walk past the new machines, the smell of warm fibre material filling the air. Workers greet Samuel with nods and smiles familiar, respectful. This place is much bigger than it used to be, Samuel says softly. 15 years of slow, steady growth. Then boom, environmental regulations changed. Consumer awareness exploded. Suddenly, sustainable packaging became a global trend. A trend you saw coming, Ethan whispers. No, Samuel corrects. A trend I understood before it was visible. I didn't follow it. I invested in the conditions that would one day create it. He pauses. That's what rich people do. Not all of them, but the ones who stay rich. They don't guess. They observe. They don't go where the crowd is excited. They go where the story is forming. Ethan stares at the machines again, imagining the timeline 15 years of being ignored. Then suddenly everyone chasing something Samuel had quietly believed in long before it was cool. I think I get it, Ethan says. You weren't looking for hype. You were looking for necessity. Samuel nods approvingly. Yes, necessity, human behaviour, inefficiency, pain points. These forces create trends long before the world notices. They sit in a small conference room overlooking the facility. Samuel folds his hands. Investing isn't about predicting the future, he says. It's about recognizing what must eventually happen. He taps the table lightly. When you see a genuine, inevitable shift before others do, you are not following a trend. You are planting the seeds of one. Ethan feels the words settle deep into his thoughts. It is the opposite of everything he'd ever believed. The opposite of everything he'd ever been taught. Samuel stands. "Come," he says, "let me show you the first prototype we built here." It looked awful. The market laughed. But the world changed, and suddenly everyone wanted exactly what they once joked about. Ethan follows him, but inside he is somewhere else entirely. He is thinking about what he has chased his whole life and what he has been blind to all along. He is beginning to understand why he always arrived late. And for the first time, he feels the spark of something entirely new, the desire not to follow trends, but to see what creates them. The drive back to the city feels different this time. Yesterday, Ethan's mind was a tangle of frustration and confusion. Today, it's filled with a quiet kind of electricity, the kind that flickers right before a light finally turns on. Samuel parks the car, not at the cafe, but at a small co-working space, tucked between a bakery and an old bookstore. Its windows glow with the warm, amber light of late afternoon. Inside, young founders type furiously on laptops. Whiteboards are filled with chaotic diagrams, and half-drunk cups of coffee crowd every table. "This," Samuel says as he steps inside, "is where trends begin. Not in headlines, not in viral videos, but in rooms like this, where people are trying to solve problems no one else notices yet." Ethan follows him past clusters of entrepreneurs, unsure where they're going until Samuel stops at a corner table where 3 people huddle around a laptop. The founders look up and break into wide smiles when they see him. "You made it," one of them says, a young woman with sharp eyes and a calm intensity. "Of course," Samuel replies, "and I brought someone who needs to understand what you're building." He gestures for Ethan to sit. "This," Samuel says, "is the startup I invested in last year." Ethan looks around. There are no fancy posters, no flashy branding, no hype, just 3 people and a cluttered table. "What do you do?" Ethan asks. The young woman closes her laptop and answers with unexpected clarity. "We're building analytics software that helps small restaurants predict food waste before it happens." Ethan waits for more. "That's it? No AI robot? No decentralized blockchain super app? No futuristic technology? Food waste?" he repeats. "Yes," Samuel says, pulling out a chair. "A silent problem, a massive one. But because it doesn't sound sexy, almost nobody pays attention." The woman continues, "Restaurants lose billions every year in spoiled inventory. Not because they're careless, but because demand is unpredictable. Too many tomatoes on Monday, not enough on Thursday. The system is broken, and while everyone else is trying to invent the next social media platform or crypto miracle, Samuel adds, these 3 are quietly solving a problem that thousands of business owners feel every single day." Ethan absorbs this, his mind stitching the pieces together. "So this isn't a trend yet," he says slowly. The woman smiles. "Not yet." "But it will be," Samuel says confidently, "because the pain is real, and real pain always creates demand." Ethan sits back, listening as the founders explain their early struggles. Restaurants skeptical at first, long nights debugging code, investors who laughed at their small market, mentors who told them to build something more viral. But then they hit their first breakthrough. A handful of local restaurants saved thousands of dollars in 1 quarter simply by using the software. "They told us we changed their entire business," the woman says, her voice quiet but steady. "That's when we knew we weren't chasing a trend. We were starting one." Ethan feels something stir inside him, respect, maybe even awe. These founders aren't chasing hype. They're solving something fundamental, something invisible to most people. And suddenly he sees what Samuel wanted him to understand. "Trends don't begin with excitement," Ethan says, thinking out loud. "They begin with inconvenience, with frustration, with someone saying, 'Why isn't there a better way?'" Samuel nods approvingly. "Every meaningful trend starts as a whisper," he says. "Only later does the world hear it as a roar." One of the founders leans forward. "We're working with 10 restaurants now, but in 5 years predicting food waste will be standard. Big chains will demand it. Governments might require it. And when that happens, you'll be the first ones there. Ethan finishes for him. The energy in the room shifts. Not loud, not explosive, but steady. Grounded, real. A kind of momentum that doesn't come from trend chasing, but from purpose. Samuel stands, signalling it's time to go. As they walk back toward the door, Ethan looks over his shoulder at the three founders' heads bent again over their laptops, building something small today that might change something big tomorrow. Outside, the air smells like warm bread from the bakery next door. Ethan exhales. I didn't expect that, he admits. That's the point, Samuel replies. Trends that matter never look impressive at the beginning. They walk in silence for a few steps before Samuel continues. Remember Harrington packaging? For years, people laughed at the idea of paying extra for biodegradable products. Then the world changed, and suddenly everyone wanted them. He opens the passenger door for Ethan. The same thing will happen here, Samuel says. Restaurants suffer from food waste. They always have. Most investors don't care because the suffering isn't loud enough. But one day, regulations, margins, and consumer expectations will make waste analytics essential. And when that day comes, Ethan says softly, these founders will already be leading the market. Samuel smiles. You're starting to see the invisible. Good. They drive back toward the city lights, and while the world rushes past the car windows, people hurrying to dinner, taxis cutting through traffic, screens flashing updates about whatever the internet is obsessed with today, Ethan realizes something profound. This is how trends are born. Not from excitement, but from solving the unnoticed. Not from noise, but from insight. Not from following, but from feeling what others ignore. For the first time, Ethan feels like the ground beneath his beliefs is shifting, not violently, but deliberately, like tectonic plates slowly forming a new landscape. He's no longer looking for the next big thing. He's trying to understand the next necessary thing. And that single shift in thinking feels like the beginning of a new life one, where he's not running after the crowd, but finally learning to walk ahead of it. The next week feels different for Ethan. Not dramatic, not explosive, but steady, like a gear that has finally clicked into place after grinding for years. He still goes to work. He still drinks the same bitter office coffee. He still hears co-workers brag about whatever new investment is skyrocketing that day. But something inside him has shifted. Where he once felt a tug, that anxious pressure to keep up now, there is a quiet stillness. A voice inside him repeating what Samuel said. Investing isn't about speed, it's about understanding, and understanding takes time. One night, while his co-workers gather around a glowing monitor chanting about a new trending stock, Ethan slips away into a small meeting room and opens his laptop. Not to trade, not to chase, but to research. Real research, not headlines, not hype, not promises, patterns. He begins with a question. What real problems exist that no one is talking about yet? It feels strange at first, like he's walking into a dark room without a flashlight. But he keeps going. He reads about supply chain inefficiencies. He digs into water scarcity issues affecting small towns. He studies how mid-sized logistics companies are struggling with outdated software. He looks at boring industries, the kind Samuel said often hold the biggest opportunities because no one else wants to look. Hours pass. For the first time in his life, Ethan isn't pretending to be an investor. He feels like one, a real one. The next day he meets Samuel, who listens quietly as Ethan explains everything he's been researching. Samuel doesn't interrupt. He doesn't correct. He doesn't offer shortcuts. He simply nods, and when Ethan finishes, he says, "Good. Now pick one." "One what?" Ethan asks. "One problem," Samuel says, "and go deeper." Ethan hesitates. The world is full of problems. Which one matters? Which one is real? Which one has the seeds of future necessity inside it? He scrolls through the notes on his phone until he stops at something he wrote almost absent-mindedly the night before. Independent pharmacies losing money due to outdated inventory systems. Ethan frowns. That one seems small, too niche. Samuel smiles. So did biodegradable packaging. So did food waste software. A small pain can scale into a massive shift if it affects enough people. Ethan bites his lip. But shouldn't I focus on something exciting? Something the market is leaning toward? Samuel laughs softly. Do you want to follow trends, or do you want to understand them? Ethan takes a breath, then another. He chooses the pharmacies, and that single decision, quiet, unremarkable, invisible to the world, becomes the beginning of something he doesn't yet understand. Over the next few weeks, Ethan dives deeper. He speaks to local pharmacists, he reads industry reports, he joins online forums, interviews business owners, watches webinars at midnight. He learns that independent pharmacies are struggling with outdated systems that cause them to overstock slow-moving medicines and understock essentials. He learns that small businesses lose thousands each year because they don't have the tools big chains use. And he realizes something. This pain is real. This pain is constant. This pain is expensive. It is the kind of pain that Samuel would call inevitable demand, a problem waiting for a solution. Ethan researches small companies developing software to solve this issue. Most of them are tiny, underfunded, ignored by mainstream investors. One company stands out, a quiet startup run by a former pharmacist who built an inventory prediction tool in her garage after her own business nearly failed. The company isn't trending anywhere. No influencers talk about it. No one is hyping it on social media. And yet, Ethan feels the pull of a pattern forming. One night, after hours of research, he leans back in his chair and whispers to himself, "This could actually matter. It's the first investment idea that feels like his own. No crowd, no pressure, just logic, research, and genuine understanding." But with understanding comes fear, a new fear, not the fear of missing out, but the fear of responsibility. What if I'm wrong? Ethan thinks late at night. What if I'm imagining a pattern that isn't there? What if I'm just fooling myself? Doubt creeps in like cold air through a cracked window. Weeks of work suddenly feel fragile. He considers giving up. He considers chasing the flashy stock his co-workers bragged about earlier that morning. But something stops him. Not Samuel's voice, his own. A new voice, steadier, calmer. You did the work. You asked the right questions. This isn't following. This is choosing. So Kia, with shaking hands, Ethan invests a measured amount. Not too much, not reckless, but enough to mean something. For the first time, he invests not in a dream, but in a pattern. And it feels different, grounded, intentional, like planting a seed instead of gambling on a storm. Days pass, then weeks. Nothing happens, no spike, no explosive growth. His friends tease him. "Bro, you invested in that? That's not even trending. Dude, you're gonna miss the wave." But for the first time in his life, Ethan isn't swayed. He doesn't check the stock every hour. He doesn't feel panic when the price dips. He doesn't feel excitement when it rises slightly. He feels patience. Samuel notices. "You're learning," Samuel says one afternoon as they sit at the cafe again. "It feels weird," Ethan admits, "but also right." Samuel nods. That's how you know you're thinking instead of reacting. And then one day, almost quietly, almost timidly, the market begins to shift. A new regulation passes, forcing small pharmacies to adopt better tracking systems. Local news reports shortages caused by outdated inventory tools. Industry groups publish warnings urging modernization. Suddenly, the company Ethan invested in is no longer invisible. It is necessary. Slowly, steadily, the price begins to rise, not from hype, but from adoption, contracts, and real-world demand. Ethan watches the slow upward curve with a stunned, quiet pride. Not because he's getting rich, but because for the first time in his life, he understood something before the crowd did. He didn't follow a trend. He followed a pattern, and the difference feels life-changing. Ethan arrives at the cafe one final time. Not because he's confused, not because he's desperate, but because something inside him feels ready, like a chapter is closing, and he wants the person who opened it to see how it ends. Samuel is already there, sitting at their usual table, stirring his coffee slowly, as if time bends around him. "You look different," Samuel says as Ethan approaches. "Do I?" Ethan smiles. "Yes. You're walking, not rushing. That's rare these days." Ethan sits down, the chair creaking softly beneath him. He's calmer than he's ever been. Not numb but centered, like a man who has rearranged the furniture of his mind, and finally likes the layout. Samuel looks at him for a moment. "So," he asks, "how does it feel? Your first investment that wasn't driven by fear?" Ethan exhales with quiet pride. "I feel aligned. I didn't chase it. I understood it. For once, I wasn't trying to be fast, I was trying to be right." "And the result?" Samuel asks. "It's growing," Ethan says. "Not fast, but for reasons that actually make sense: contracts, regulations, real adoption. I finally understand what it feels like to plant something and watch it take root." Samuel nods. That's how real wealth begins, quietly. For a few moments they sit in silence. Not awkward silence, the kind that only exists between two people who have shared something meaningful. Ethan looks out the window at the busy street. People hurry past, eyes glued to their screens, chasing whatever is trending that minute. "I used to be like them," Ethan says softly. "Always running, always behind." Samuel responds gently. "You were running because you thought wealth lived in speed, but wealth lives in understanding." Ethan smiles at the sentence, the way it unravels so neatly, the way it feels like the thesis of everything Samuel has taught him. "I want to thank you," Ethan says. "You didn't just teach me how to invest, you taught me how to think." Samuel raises an eyebrow. "No," he replies. "I reminded you that thinking is something you're allowed to do, even when the world tells you to react instead." Ethan laughs quietly. It's true. For so long, he let the crowd do his thinking for him. "But why help me?" Ethan asks. "You didn't have to." Samuel gazes into his cup for a moment, choosing his words. "Because somebody once helped me," he says. "And because I've seen too many bright young people drown in noise. You were willing to listen. That's rare." He pauses, then adds, "You were willing to slow down. That's even rarer." A waiter passes by, refilling Samuel's coffee. Outside, the sky is shifting towards sunset streaks of gold, stretching across the glass windows of nearby buildings. Ethan looks at Samuel, suddenly overwhelmed by gratitude. "What happens now?" he asks. "Do I keep studying patterns? Look for more invisible problems?" Samuel chuckles. "What happens now," he says, "is life. You keep learning. You keep observing. You keep thinking. That's the work." He leans back, eyes warm. "And when the world starts shouting about the next big thing, when everyone around you starts sprinting, you stay still long enough to ask, 'What's the real story underneath?' That's how you stay ahead." Ethan nods slowly. He understands now. Not just the words, the mindset. He's no longer the man staring at red numbers on his phone, praying for a miracle. He's someone who can look at the world with clarity, not panic. Samuel reaches into his pocket and places something on the table. Not a business card, not a document. Just a small, smooth stone, worn at the edges. Dark grey, simple. Ethan picks it up, confused. "It's from a river near my childhood home," Samuel says. "I used to skip stones across the water. Every stone looked still, lifeless, ordinary. But once you threw it, it created ripple circles expanding outward, touching everything around them." He gestures toward the stone in Ethan's hand. Trends are ripples. But someone has to throw the stone first. Ethan turns the stone over between his fingers, feeling its weight, its history. "Thank you," he whispers. "You earned it," Samuel replies. They stand, and for the first time, Ethan notices that Samuel looks older than he did before. Not weaker, just more human. A mentor nearing the end of his chapter, passing something forward. As they step outside, the evening breeze brushes past them. The city glows, life moves, the world hums with noise and urgency. But Ethan isn't part of that noise anymore. He's walking, not running, not chasing at a pace that feels deliberate, grounded, free. Samuel gives him a final nod. "Remember," he says, "rich people don't follow trends." Ethan finishes the sentence smiling. "They create them." Samuel smiles back. And then Ethan walks away, not with the anxious energy of a man afraid of missing out, but with the quiet confidence of someone who finally understands the deeper rhythm beneath the world's noise. For the first time in his life, he isn't looking for the crowd. He's looking beyond it, at the invisible, at the necessary, at the patterns only a thinker sees. He slips the river stone into his pocket, feeling its cool surface against his palm, a reminder that the smallest actions can create the widest ripples. Behind him, the cafe door closes. Ahead of him stretches a future he no longer fears. A future he's finally ready to shape. A future where he doesn't follow trends, he creates them.